right, well, I'm Rob Fay, filling in for Jody Vance. Those are definitely big shoes to fill, but I'm very lucky because this is something that is near and dear to my heart. I am joined by the founder and CEO of Biovaxys Technology, James Passin. James, good morning. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm great, Rob. Thank you very much for inviting me to come on your show today.
Oh, it's no problem. And I think there's some big things that are happening with you guys. You guys went public last year. Can you walk me through the nerves of finally taking this public and everything that's gone into the last 12 months?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm someone personally who has a deep familiarity with the Canadian capital markets, and I've been involved for 20 years on the buy side as a hedge fund manager, quite active with Canadian issuers. I retired from that business, and now I'm an entrepreneur, an investor, and a businessman. So I'm on the other side of the fence, but for me, there was no other choice other than the Canadian capital market to list Biovaxys. And so there was a lot of work, absolutely, in getting the listing statement together, putting a deal together with a listed shell company, and then transforming that merged entity into Biovaxys and raising some capital. But that's now ancient history, and we're moving forward as a public issuer.
When you think of taking something public, and again, I'm just talking to the average Joe like myself, for example, walk me through what that means, because, the difference between public and private, I think we all assume we know what that is, but can you walk me through what it took to get that public?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you look, really from sort of the broader conception, why go public? Well, the reality is that, as a relatively early stage private company, capital is very expensive. So to get capital that's incentivized to go into a private business where there's no liquidity, there's no clear exit, unclear timeframes, generally that capital is going to be expensive, whether it's debt or equity or some combination. And really, you can look at the history of technology companies where the venture capital investors, even the angel investors, have a disproportionate impact on the governance and on business development, on management strategy. As a public issuer, you can attract a whole different universe of capital, whether it's high net worths, family offices, funds, but essentially the universe of investors that will come into a public company. And even if they come into a private placement, into a public issuer, like a pipe deal with a 4-month hold, there is plenty of capital available that is not going to make the same exacting demands that the venture capital investors would make. And then, the other advantage is that you get the multiplier effect, as a public company. And as a private company, if you make $1, you keep $1. But as a public company, you get a price earnings multiple, and you even get a multiple on future earnings. So that, there's a huge incentive to go public. I mean, not simply to increase the value of your business assets, but to, make it easier to access capital to actually develop your product lines. And in our case, our product lines are solving some of the most important human health problems in the world. So we're quite keen to move forward. It's not really just about money and economics, but it's about, changing the world and improving human health with our technology, which is really the reason why, I co-founded Biovaxys and why I'm sitting here today with you.
Well, let's talk about that, James, because the world obviously turned on its ear about 16 months ago. Biovaxys is right in the wheelhouse of what everybody's trying to learn about right now. Antiviral, anti-cancer. These are two things that are obviously near and dear to my heart as well, if you knew a little bit about my story. But let's talk more about your story. The world right now is looking for solutions, and Biovaxys is right in that conversation.
Well, our technology, which is based on a concept which is probably not a word that many people are familiar with, but we call it Haptenization. And I'll get into Haptenization in more detail if that's of interest. But effectively, Haptenization is a tool which enables the creation of novel vaccines that are able to flag an antigen, whether it's a cancer antigen, whether it's a viral antigen, but effectively to flag an antigen as being dangerous and effectively rendering it highly immunogenic. And then when that is introduced back to the immune system, the human immune system will mount both an antibody, but more importantly than that, a robust T cell response to the haptenized antigen. And effectively, this is technology effectively pioneered by our chief medical officer and technology founder, Dr. David Bird, who retired professor of immunology, practicing oncologist, and a serial biotech inventor. And oddly enough, there were doctors playing around with haptens with patients 100 years ago, but it really died out until Dr. Bird picked up the flag and invented a haptenized vaccine platform. But the essence is that by haptenizing, we can help the immune system differentiate between self and other, if it's simplistically.
I want to get into that because I always think of stigmas when it comes to kind of a full circle effect. I mean, you talked about haptenization a century ago, and now you talk about reintroducing it to a new generation. Was that something that you felt was a hurdle, or did you think that you were striking gold by bringing this back into the conversation in today's world?
Well, if you look at the literature, and again, this is, in the old days, a long time ago, before we have the current standards of research, doctors found that they could inject this class of chemicals called haptens, for example, into warts, and that they would tend to clear up. But there wasn't much understanding of what was happening. But it's really Dr. Bird that pioneered the concept of haptenization, which is a bit different. So we don't just inject haptens into people, but in fact, what we do is we conjugate a hapten to, for example, to a viral protein or to a irradiated cancer cell. We effectively combine the hapten with the target cell or viral protein, and effectively what that does is it renders the haptenized antigens to be highly immunogenic, by which I mean is that they present to the immune system, and the immune system sees this haptenized antigen and says, you know what, we really don't like it. We don't like this. And effectively, that can become a tool to educate the immune system to mount an immune response against the underlying antigen that's been haptenized. And even in the case, for example, of a cancer antigen, where the immune system really will tolerate cancer and say, you know what, this does not look foreign, we're going to leave it alone. But when you haptenize the cancer antigens, you can train the immune system to use its own resources of T cells, the killer T cells, and effectively the suite of T cells, and to attack the cancer antigens. So this really is potentially a paradigm shift in cancer treatment, because instead of simply suppressing the immune system of cancer patients and poisoning them with for example, chemo and radiation, is that instead we're going to effectively use the patient's own immune system to join the fight against cancer. Not that will replace these traditional treatments, but it could be an addition. And then really what we had a breakthrough on the virus side. When the COVID hit, and we've been following it, my team actually have been following it since December, and when things started locking down, we wanted to do something to help. And Dr. Bird and I both immediately came to the conclusion that by haptenizing the S1 subunit of what's called the spike protein, that you could create an effective vaccine, and you could flag it to the immune system, which would mount a T cell response, as well as an antibody response to COVID. And what we thought was particularly exciting about this approach is, number one, the importance of T cell immunity. Now, Dr. Bird, in the decades that he worked in human trials under FDA regulated human trials, successfully developing a haptenized cancer vaccine, that's all about T cells, because antibodies don't do anything with cancer. So he's really deep in on T cells. So we knew we'd get a T cell response. And what now, if you look at peer-reviewed literature and authoritative scientific information about COVID, it's clear that T cell immunity is lasting in healthy individuals that recover from COVID, and that the antibody response can begin to wane after time, but the T cell immunity is durable. And in fact, there's a study from Singapore that patients that had contracted and recovered from SARS-CoV-1, which is a very similar virus, 17 years ago, still have protective T cell immunity to SARS-CoV-1. It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away for a long time. And it's also more likely to be cross-reactive against different variants. So the T cell immunity is really the key to global health recovery in our view. Number one. And number two, it's relatively, I won't say it's easy, but it's not that complicated to make our haptenized viral protein vaccine. And in fact, we made the vaccine for our mouse experiment, which I'll get to in a minute. So haptens are readily available, cheap chemicals. The process of making our vaccine is not that complicated. When you compare to some of the newer approaches, where there's a huge amount of of complexity in manufacturing and distributing these newer vaccines, we thought this could represent a competitive advantage longer term. And thirdly, our view is that we will over time, when we have the data, we will be able to demonstrate that we're likely to have a superior safety profile. And the reason why we have this confidence is that on the cancer side, there's been over 500 human volunteers that have received the haptenized cancer vaccine, where we have all the safety data. So we did an animal study in vivo with our COVID vaccine candidate last year in mice, and 56 mice, and the data was really mind blowing. And we had a 96.4% efficacy for antibodies with the vaccinated mice. If you look, we had 4 different dose groups. Using the titers, you could see that the antibody levels were dose dependent, and on the 2 higher dose groups, there was effectively 100% efficacy for T cells. And in fact, the entire suite of T cells that you want to see, after vaccination. And in addition, we had Ohio State University run an experiment. So Ohio State University has a lab with SARS experts, COVID experts. They have a BL3 security lab. They can experiment with live COVID virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So Ohio State University, they ran an experiment with sera from our vaccinated mice, and they observed what's called a neutralizing antibody. And that really, on the antibody side, is really the holy grail. Is it what's called a neutralizing antibody? Because non-neutralizing antibodies are bad news. A neutralizing antibody is what you want to see. And then in terms of safety, in all of the vaccinated mice, there was not a single material observable side effect. So effectively, there was no toxicity, there was no serious tolerance issue. Now, of course, that's in mice, it's not in humans. So, we can't make any claims about safety and efficacy in a human trial. But, for me, when I see a vaccine in an animal study having almost 100% efficacy with no side effects, it looks encouraging.
I would assume, James, and I appreciate all that information. One of the things that I picked from it is the fact that you can get into that final tier, the 95 to 100% efficacy. That's a big deal from an investment perspective as well, because there's probably a lot of confidence right now in Biovaxys that in this new age, and I keep circling back to the world that we currently live in right now, people are looking for solutions. They're not looking for, tests at this point. They want to see numbers. They want to see data. And right now it looks like that's what you guys are pumping forward.
Absolutely. And now, of course, if the devil's advocate is that, okay, James, you've got a very promising vaccine, but you have animal data. There's 4 vaccines approved in the United States, for example, under emergency use authorizations that have, good efficacy data. They're already on the market. What is the market left for you? And, from my perspective, is that firstly, we'll see, but I do think that, the likely excellent safety profile of our vaccine, with equal or better efficacy, means that there is an opportunity for our vaccine. Thirdly, on top of this, there's the entire world, which is not necessarily able to afford to have access to these vaccines. Then there's the issue of whether the vaccines that are rolling out, and there are questions about the vaccines, for example, that have been approved in China, whether they're inducing a T cell response. And in fact, there's very little data on the T cell responses for the vaccines that are coming out in the West. But when you look at this particular question of T cell immunity, that really is the most important question, because the T cell immunity is going to be durable. And if you look at the scientific literature, it's more likely to be cross-reactive against different variants than the antibodies. So you want a vaccine that induces a robust T cell response. And maybe all the vaccines that are approved do. The data it's not clear. I mean, hopefully they do. But let's leave the COVID question aside, although I'll come back to it in our other product, COVID DTH. But if you leave the question of COVID aside, what we have proven at Biovaxys is that our haptenized vaccine platform is applicable to viruses. That at least in animal models, we can produce excellent data, and we don't have any manufacturing hurdle with our vaccine. So there's numerous other viruses, other pathogens that we can go after. I mean, I don't think these viruses are going to stop. I mean, once international travel's back, there's going to be some, MERS or some other version of, some horrendous pathogen or some, all these pathogens will keep evolving, keep coming out. So, having a technology platform that we can very quickly produce a vaccine candidate that is, as at least a reasonable basis for belief will have, good safety, excellent safety and efficacy profile, is very exciting. So we see that there's applicability of our platform to other viruses. And, I'll mention in terms of one of our existing products, it's preclinical, is a candidate. It's a haptenized HPV vaccine for adults. And we actually have a partner, which is ProCare Health, which we can talk about in more detail later. ProCare Health is a large pharma biotech company based in Spain. It's a private company. It was actually spun out of Procter and Gamble. So it's a significant company. It's one of the leading players in women's healthcare in biotechnology innovations in Europe. So we partnered with ProCare Health on a number of different products, but one of the products is an adult HPV vaccine. And what's exciting there is HPV is on the universal health problem. And for women, it can lead to cervical lesions and cervical cancer and to death ultimately. It's extraordinarily common both with men and women. Now, there are 2 approved HPV vaccines that have excellent safety and efficacy data, but they are off-label for adults, really anybody that's been exposed through sexual contact to HPV. Those vaccines are not believed to work. There's no data to suggest that they work. And there's an argument that the haptenization can break the tolerance and allow the immune system, through T cell response to clear out HPV, even in an adult that's been exposed. Now, we need to prove that. We need the data, so it's early stage. But a haptenized adult HPV vaccine has a potential to be a global blockbuster because, probably 30 to 40% of the global population infected with HPV, some percentage of them will convert and want to receive this vaccine. So we see this as a huge opportunity. So again, we're not just staying with COVID, although we're quite excited about our COVID candidate. But we see that we have the entire universe of viruses. Not all viruses, but there are some viruses that we believe the haptenization approach will work.
Is there one in particular? And I'm so glad you brought that up, James, because the world is so tunnel vision fixated right now on COVID and solutions to that. But, for example, in my family, we're still battling cancer collectively. And, I sit there and I say to myself, we're still looking for solutions and we're looking for ways to get healthy. So I guess my question to you, James, is when you look at the full gamut of, challenges out there, you guys are more than just a one-trick pony. You guys have your hands in a lot of different jars right now, and I think that's something that should make investors happy.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the aggregate expenditure on cancer therapy, cancer treatment, it's really a mind-blowing, staggeringly large number, and to be able to reduce that expenditure, improve outcomes for cancer patients and creating alternatives. I mean that is of massive not only economic importance, but it's a massive mental and spiritual importance to everybody that is suffering directly and indirectly from the problem of cancer. So there has been innovation in cancer immunotherapy, and I would point out to the field of checkpoint antibodies, which is now an $18 billion per year industry. And that's been a huge success in terms of cancer immunotherapy, but it's not working. The checkpoint antibodies by themselves are not the panacea in all cancers. And that's really creating an opportunity for us. And we see that the checkpoint antibodies, we think, will work very well with our approach. And in fact, our current generation cancer vaccine platform, it differs from the previous generation, which has already been in human trials, which already has excellent clinical data. But we're starting again with phase 1 because Dr. David Bird have made 2 important innovations to the technology. The first one, Haptenization, I will get into it if it's of interest. It's a bit technical. And the second point is to combine it with a checkpoint antibody. And the reason why you'd want to do that is the way that checkpoint antibodies work is that they effectively inhibit what are called Tregs from downregulating the T cell response to cancer. So effectively, cancer has various tricks to stay in the body to evade the immune system, and one of them is it has effectively a biochemical mechanism to effectively downregulate a T cell response to cancer antigens. So checkpoint antibodies work very well because they block the ability of cancer to evade T cells. Now, think about my Biovaxys technology platform. Based on our earlier conversation, we're inducing a robust T cell response to antigens, be they viral or cancer. So in this case, cancer antigens. So if you can induce the patient's own immune system to mount a T cell response against their own cancer antigens, and you combine it with the checkpoint antibody, which prevents cancer from evading T cells, then that will be, at least we think it will be, like effectively, like, let's call it a 1-2 knockout punch. Where and so we're very excited. We have our lead cancer vaccine product is our ovarian cancer vaccine candidate. We will do a phase 1 compassionate use trial in the European Union with our partner ProCare Health. I mentioned ProCare Health earlier. It's a very large pharma company based in Spain. We're very honored to be partnered with ProCare Health. So ProCare Health is going to do the trial for us. They have all the infrastructure and resources to do this trial in Europe. And ProCare Health is making a $900,000 in-kind investment into the phase 1 trial, which is a huge, it really should provide some assurance, because you've got a very large pharma company that's putting skin in the game and really standing behind our technology and helping to support our phase 1 trial, which is great because that reduces our financial contribution, but also provides really the strongest of all possible partners in Europe to advance the product. And we've given up for this in the partnership is we've granted exclusive marketing rights to Europe and to the UK to ProCare Health. But it's a fantastic arrangement. We're very proud of that relationship. And ovarian cancer is a huge problem for women that are fortunate enough to get ovarian cancer. It's a huge unmet medical need. Checkpoint antibodies don't work that well for whatever reason in ovarian cancer. So we think well, look, based on the previous generation of our technology, finished a phase 2 trial for ovarian cancer, and with excellent data. So we're now taking that. We're starting to get in phase 1, but we've improved the technology. As I said, we've added a checkpoint antibody that's covered now by provisional patent application, and then the other innovation we have is what's called Haptenization. And not to get too deep into the weeds, but just from a high level summary, the hapten is either hydrophilic or hydrophobic. And the previous generation of our technology, we went with one particular hapten, effectively, but by combining a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic hapten, it allows the vaccine to interact with the entire cell, because some parts of the cell are going to be hydrophilic, some hydrophobic, and there was no issue. It doesn't seem to be any basis for an issue with toxicity or tolerance problems. So in other words, and there's some data to support this. It's early stage, but we believe it will demonstrate that the bihaptenized vaccine will result in even better results than the single hapten. And so that's effectively our current generation's bihaptenized vaccine, and then we're adding the checkpoint antibody. And so ovarian cancer is really the first start, but then we can go after any solid resectable tumor. We can go after. So it's a huge. The verticals that we can go after with our platform, just on the oncology side, is massive.
James, two things here. One is, ovarian cancer is one of the top cancers. It's in the top 5. 1 in 78 women will have a challenge with that in their lifetime, which to me speaks to the fact that there is still a very big need to take this battle on. James, I got to ask you a personal question, just between you and me. The information that you've presented to me is overwhelming and overwhelmingly positive. When you're at home, are you able to turn that off? Are you able to still be like, are you able to, watch sports or go to the movies? Because to me, I got to think there's just a million things going on in that head of yours.
Well, I mean, luckily, I enjoy what I do. I mean, I didn't have to co-found Biovaxys. I believe in the technology. I want to carry the flag forward to get in the clinic and ultimately to get to the point of commercialization. So for me, this is not work; it's pleasure. Of course, there's a lot of labor involved and complexity and a lot of small irritating things. But I would say that it's really an honor and a pleasure to be burdened with all of the tasks related to running this company. Obviously I need to have time for my children and my lovely wife and but yeah, for me, and I'd say for my entire executive team, we're all in on Biovaxys. I mean, this really is, we will get this to the point of commercialization.
Well, I will tell you this, James, just to wrap this up. My family, my father right now is battling cancer. I'm the one that drives him to and from all of his appointments. We need people like you in the trenches because sometimes we look at each other and we don't know the speak that the doctors are speaking to us sometimes. But now that we know there's people in the background that are working for us, we can put a face to your work. And it's invaluable. We couldn't do it without people like you fighting alongside us. We don't get a chance to really often see the faces behind that are doing the testing and the development and putting their money where their mouth is. But just want you to know that there's a family up in Vancouver, Canada that really needs your work. And I really appreciate your passion for it. So James, thank you for everything that you do. We are huge fans of Biovaxys, and more than anything, thank you for making time for me today.
It's a great pleasure, and we'll do our best. And thank you very much for having me on the show.